Dear candidate, dear members of the reading committee and the Corona, dear supervisors, colleagues, families and friends, welcome to this very nice, beautiful Friday, nearly afternoon session of the defense. And I hereby open formally the academic ceremony in which Byron Zechmair will defend his academic thesis entitled Grasp, Generation and Multimodal Localization with Applications to Human-Robot Collaborations. And I kindly invite you now to give a great summary of your work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. I'm glad that there are so many people actually here today. I'm a bit surprised. But yeah, it's good that my thesis got a bit of attention. So, a bit about myself. I started here at Maastricht University about 4 years ago now. Back then, I was a fresh-faced young electrical engineer with a focus on robotics. And back then, and up until recently, most of my work was funded via the HPP, so the Human Brain Project. At first, I was a bit surprised because the idea of the Human Brain Project is to study the human brain and to gain insights about it. So what did they need an electrical engineer for? But as it turns out, at the end of the day, not only did they look at how the human brain works, but we're also interested in using this knowledge and applying that to other real-world applications. And our research group had, among other things, the task of applying these insights to robotics. And for this, we discovered 3 key areas that we were looking at. The first one was grasping. So for grasping, we as humans, we have extremely good, I'm just going to call it hardware and software. It's something that's been developed for millions of years, and it cannot really be beaten for just general grasping applications. The second thing is vision, where again, we've been seeing our entire lives, and that's something that we are very good at after a while. And lastly, cooperation. Because we as humans, we're social creatures, and we just love to work together on different tasks. So for each of these 3 different segments, I've divided that up into smaller details, and I'm just going to briefly go over each of them. So without further ado, let me just go into the nitty-gritty of it. For grasping, the first thing that we looked at was how can we model how a gripper interacts with an object that is being grasped. The idea here was that usually what people use are physics simulators. And there are different ones available, such as Gazebo, Bullet, Mujoko, whatever. For the specific area of grasping, however, we realized that oftentimes these proved to be fairly unstable. And this was mostly due to the close kinematic exchange and the high contact stiffness that's available when a gripper actually grasps an object. So what we did is we looked at these, saw that they weren't reliable enough for what we did, and so we expanded on them and developed our own method. What we did here is we looked at a penalty-based method to simulate physics. We had here two key areas to our simulators. The first one was that we used Lagrangian mechanics to model kinematic exchange, such as in the gripper or wherever else. And the key point was that we used penalty-based simulators for contact resolution. This means that the contacts that we looked at, we could reduce the mechanical stiffness and thus increase the reliability of our simulator. Now, penalty-based simulation in this case means that when 2 objects are in contact, we compute the forces that are pushing them apart by looking at how much they overlap. And if you think about how that looks in real life, you can imagine a deformation, such as what happens when you push 2 fingers together, and you can see that they deform a little bit before they actually start pushing each other apart. And now, when compared to what's actually to other simulators, we can show that ours are somewhat more reliable, particularly in the area of grasping. Now, having said that, with the simulator in place, we actually looked at grasps themselves. So we wanted to see how can we measure the performance of a grasp? And again, what we saw is that recently a lot of the information about this is looking at grasps in the static sense. So you look at a grasp, you take the grasp, and then you analyze it in this one instance. For us, we were interested in manipulating objects, so we looked at how we could expand upon this a little bit more and actually move an object around and see how the grasp reacts to us moving this object around. We did this by applying a local sensitivity analysis to the grasped object while it is being moved. So what we were looking at is how well can a grasp actually resist external perturbations. So something like someone pushing against the object while it is being held in the grasp, and how well this grasp actually resists that. The better it resists it, the more we said this grasp is good. And this allows us to actually rate different grasps and compare them towards each other. So having said that, what we also need is a way to look at the environment and gain feedback from said environment. And from that, again, we looked at what's available in nature. In this case, not directly humans, but actually something called weakly electric fish. These fish swim around salt water and the like, and they generate an electric field around them. This electric field, when you have an object close by, it gets deformed. And this deformation changes properties of the field, and that can then be measured by the fish. So these fish gain insight of the 3D workings of their environment. And we actually tried to do something similar, because for robots it would also be good to get a 3D insight of how their environment looks like. We developed our own custom hardware here, where we had the pleasure of working with people from Stockholm who let us use their robot as well as their electronics lab for that. The caveat here is, however, that water, where the fish swim through, it's very electrically conductive. Air around the robot isn't. So instead of measuring the electric field via resistance, like the fish do, we measure the capacitance. And this actually gave us surprisingly good results. So we can measure objects up to around 15 centimeters away. Not only can we measure where they are, we can also measure their directionality and distance, which allows us to do something such as following, as you can see here in the video. And additionally, these sensors are so accurate, surprisingly accurate actually, that if we have them scanning across a hand or something, we can create a 3D scan of the hand, as you can see here in the colorful image. Now, this gives us two things. We can analyze grasps, and we can gain feedback about the grasps from the environment. The last thing that we wanted to look at is how can we plan a grasp. And grasp planning itself, what that usually means is that you have an algorithm that takes an object and a gripper, you put those two into the algorithm, and it tells you which kind of grasps are available. The problem here is that when you grasp objects, usually what happens is that there are a multitude of different methods that you can use for anything. For example, here for the bunny, you can decide to grasp it around the ears, or the front, or the back, or whatever. And this is something that's difficult to visualize and also difficult to explore in its entirety. So we actually took a step back from this. Instead of looking at the grasp space itself, so the different possible grasps, we looked at the situation a bit earlier, so a bit in the past. This means that instead of looking at completed grasps, we mapped out different positions around the object. And then from each of these positions, we applied something that's called a grasp synthesis policy. So one method of generating a grasp from these different starting positions. The advantage of this is that this lets us create a nice mapping around different objects. And these mappings, as it turns out, lets us also combine relative grasps that are similar to each other to various different sets. And these sets here all incorporate various different grasps that are similar and also perform similarly. So when actually doing the task of selecting a grasp for a given objective, we can select one from the appropriate set and use that. And so when looking at this, we get a slight advantage to other grasp generators available, because these other grasp generators, they usually focus on giving you the best possible grasp, one grasp. And we here instead focus on giving a nice overview of which grasps are all available. So that was for grasping what we did. For vision itself, we also looked at what humans can do. And for this, just a brief question. So if I have one hand, and I place the other one before it, you still know that there's a hand there. So in the case of occlusion and things like that, you still are able to determine that the hand is there and that, yeah, it's in this given position. This is something that we also wanted to apply to vision-based models, because at the end of the day, what we wanted to do is we wanted to have a system where we can have a robot and a human interact with each other. And the important thing is that the robot always knows where the human is, even if, say, the robot moves between vision, so camera and human, and the camera loses sight of it. So here we worked with colleagues from EPFL, Alban Brunet, who provided us a method of object detection. So this is a deep predictive coding network that is similar to humans and that is able to determine how well to localize objects even if they are behind other things. And what it gives us is a segmentation mask. So you take the camera image and the system gives you the segmentation mask of where an object is in this scene. The problem is what we have is only the segmentation mask itself. What we want is the actual position of the object. So for that, what we ourselves contributed to this is a bit of shadow puppetry. So objects in the segmentation mask, we have that, and then we have a 3D renderer which tries out different positions and looks at which position actually properly mirrors the segmentation mask. And because we know which position that is, we can also get the actual pose of the object out of that. And what we can see is that with this approach, we slightly outperform other methods such as post-CNN, particularly in the areas that are relevant for work cells. So short distances and light occlusion. The problem is, however, again, that while this works, it's not 100% reliable. We wanted something that's a bit more reliable because if you have humans and robots working together, it's very imperative that there's no injuries. So we added a second sensing modality towards this. Instead of just relying on vision, we also applied the capacitive sensors. Instead of just having them inside of the grippers themselves, we had them around the robot hull as well. So we have various grippers around the robot hull, and these allow us to get a second sensor input. We combined both of these sensor inputs together via an extended Kalman filter, and that means that we have long-range sensing via the camera, and if human and robot are close to each other, we can use the capacitive sensor for additional, more accurate input as well. Combining these two things together, we get a nice way, again, of determining where the human is and properly avoiding collisions. And this actually lets us perform various tasks with human and robot together. So what we looked at is having a simple scenario, which we then had in the HPP itself as a demonstrator, which is that we had a robot and a human working together for a tool handover. So this combines everything that I discussed previously. With the vision-based system, we're able to determine where the human is, localize it in the scene. Do the same thing for the screwdriver that we're looking at here, and have the robot then move towards the screwdriver, use our planning algorithm to properly plan the grasp, then we can execute the grasp and have the screwdriver placed in the correct receptacle. And so just as a brief overview of everything that we did beforehand, We had grasping, where we took a method of looking at or modeling the scene, understanding and comparing different grasps towards each other, getting feedback from the environment, and then actually planning out different grasps. For the vision-based system, we're able to localize objects in a way that's resistant to occlusion, and we combined this again with our capacitive sensors to reliably be able to locate a human in the scene. We combined all of this together to have a robot and a human collaborating on different tasks. So I still have 10 seconds. So, hallo Omi, hallo Opi, schön, dass ihr noch da seid. And yes, that's it then from my end.
Thanks a lot for this very clear and informative presentation. I would like now to open the opposition by asking Professor Ralf Peters from Maastricht University, an expert in mathematical aspects of knowledge engineering. Professor Peters.
Thank you. Dear candidate, first of all, my congratulations with finishing your thesis. I think it was a very nice collection of different topics in the work, and I think it's very clearly written in the same spirit as your presentation was very clear. And also my congratulations to the supervisory team.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have lots of questions, and I can ask technical questions to you. I can also go into more philosophical things even. What I would like to start is with a picture that you had in your presentation, which is actually on page 21, the picture with the ball and the cube intersecting. And that is about a method that you have where you do the deformations in order to handle these otherwise overlapping areas. And I was wondering, could you explain how it would work if the object that is getting overlapped by, let's say, the robot hand is a very thin object. Suppose you want to pick up a credit card.
Yes.
And it happens that a finger pierces through.
Yes.
Would it still work? What would happen? Would it be a hard situation or a simple one? Could you explain?
So the simulation would not work in that case. However, the thing is, when properly configured, the resistive forces should be able to push these objects apart before the situation you described appears. So what would happen is that the object would first of all get in contact, and the initial contact forces should already be hard enough, strong enough to push them apart and prevent this kind of double-edged overlap.
Yeah, that depends, of course, on the time steps and the frame rate or that you have, right?
Yes,
but that is fast enough.
Yes. So, yeah, exactly.
Okay, then that clears that up. So, thank you for that. And then the next thing I would like to ask you about is about another picture that was in your presentation. This is the picture on page 73 with a hand with various potentials or the voltages that you've measured. And I was struggling a little bit, and I hope you can clear it up, because it was clear that the machinery that you have, the sensors actually work. So I think in the end you must have done it all correctly. But in this picture, on page 73, you see the scale that is there. It says that voltages above the hand or at the hand are 1.2, and if you're away from the hand, it's becoming yellow, and it's 1.4.
Yes.
Yeah. But if you browse one page back to page 71, then you have these. That's another graph. Then it seems to be the other way around, or isn't it? If you're close. There, if the distance is small, then you have a high value, and if you're further away from the hand, you get a lower value. But it seems to be the other way around in that image that you're showing.
Yes.
So which of the two would be the correct one?
So the correct one is the hand image.
Okay, so
that's the correct one.
So the voltage goes down if you get closer.
Yes, and I believe that in this case here, we tried out different circuit designs for this.
Yeah.
And in this one here, I believe we added a subtractor to the circuit beforehand. So that's why the voltages are inverse.
It's in the other direction.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah, But there's, of course, an issue if you want to implement it and you want to detect objects. And, and maybe in the same line, do you know what happens if you were to wear gloves while working?
Yes, that's actually interesting because it depends on which type of gloves you wear. It depends on the permeability of the gloves. We discussed various different materials, and it turns out that, for example, I believe it was latex.
Yeah.
It's very the permeability is very similar to air, so that means it's not that visible in itself. But if you have different types of gloves, it would change the detection capabilities.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. Another more philosophical question then. You've been approaching the safety of this cobotics, this collaboration challenge, I think entirely from the perspective of the robot. The robot should stop if you're too close, and that is detected, and you have the sensors for that. And therefore also occlusion is an issue, all these kind of things. But there's also the human, because it's an interaction, you're collaborating. So couldn't you also leverage that part of the collaboration into the safety concept? How do you look at it? Can you say something about that?
Yes, actually. So, highly esteemed opponent. The idea behind it is that usually humans, we try to not get hurt. So in general, it's the case that humans, when they're working with robots or with machinery, we have certain innate ideas of how we can prevent this. However, what happens is that robots themselves, they sometimes behave unpredictably. So they want to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. And if there happens to be a human between that, then the robot won't take that into account. Humans, if they're experienced with working with the robot, they might realize that, yes, this is the working area of the robot itself. So if it were, it might want to move between these two places. But this is something that's only capable if you have a human that's experienced with that and trained in that. And it's often the case that you don't have that. And in that case, you would want a robot that takes that a little bit more into consideration.
Yeah. I was thinking about an analogy that we have in the traffic. At some point, lots of vehicles got electrified. And then it became more dangerous because you were used to hearing a car or a scooter nearing you. So could you do that the other way around, that maybe the robot makes a sound when it starts accelerating or gets near you?
Yes, that might actually be a good idea. So to have a prior warning, so something that revs up similar to a car when it's accelerating. Yeah.
And would there be other ways of leveraging that idea with other kind of signals? Or?
Yeah, something like a vision-based system. Beforehand, I was working on a different project where robot-human safety was also trying to be taken into consideration, and they had a pressure-sensitive floor instead. So if a human was detected to be moving into the work cell itself, the pressure-sensitive floor would detect the human, and it would automatically have the robot move slower, so not. And the closer they get together, the more slower the robot would work until it stops completely.
Oh, that's good to hear that they're taking these other modalities into account.
Yes.
If I may, I still have another question, which is also about the technology involved. The other day I was at a presentation where they showed the workings and also results with event cameras.
Yes.
And you know what event cameras are, right? So could you, for your kind of application, also make use of that to handle, for instance, occlusion?
Possibly. Just one interesting thing is that the people I worked with in Stockholm, they were currently looking at event-based cameras. And they were looking at how to detect objects with these event-based cameras. However, I'm not sure how far along they are. I believe it needs a certain shift in the way that the vision is processed to be able to detect objects and see where they are.
Yeah, because what I experience is that actually the contours of persons would remain visible even if they got occluded by something that passes in front of them, because that's what the camera allows to capture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and cameras are, I think, they have a very high refresh rate, so it makes it probably a bit fast. It might increase the reaction time.
Okay, then, well, I would like to return the word to the prorector. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your interesting question. I pass on the word now to our external member who is present online via Zoom. This is Professor Dr. Andrea Cherubini. He is an expert in robotics at the École Centrale de Nantes in France. Professor Cherubini, the word is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael, for your nice presentation. So I'm very honored to be with you, although remotely, be with you in this defense. So I read with interest your PhD thesis, which was very broad. So I think aside the research, which also was valorized via some publications, I also think it was a great tool for you to learn on many fields. I believe that the PhD is not just research, it's also learning. And in fact, it's very broad, as you showed today in the presentation, also because you dealt with very diverse topics, going from engineering design of this capacitive sensing to quite high level, I would say, computer science problems, such as the design of a simulator and the use of deep machine learning. So in this sense, I think you learned a lot. Then maybe it's so broad that to some extent it may have been a bit difficult to go in depth on some topic. And so in this sense, maybe also in terms of publications, but this is also sometimes the case, especially if you're involved in a big project, and you have the constraints from the project adding on to the constraints of the PhD. But yes, I think it was very interesting to see your viewpoint on these problems. So this was my comment, and now there's a small delay. I hope you hear me well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just.
So now for the.
Just continue.
Okay. So yes, for the questions, my first question, it was not very clear for me in chapter 5 of the document. How are the gripper motions computed from the relative object robot pose? So today you mentioned the policy synthesis, but can you say a few words more about this? And how do you manage the balance of the object, and also avoiding maybe collisions while grasping?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your comment and for your question. The idea behind the grasp synthesis policy for us was that we wanted a method that's able to take advantage of the surface topology of various different objects. So for example, the example that we have in the thesis is the cup with the mug itself. And to take advantage of this, what we wanted to do is we wanted to have something that's able to look at small deformities inside of an object and sort of grasp around them. So regarding that, we had several virtual forces applied to various points along the gripper during the closing process, with the tips of the gripper being moved towards the closest surface point. Additionally to that, we had additional virtual forces pushing away from the back end of the gripper, so pushing away. And what we discovered is that with this, we can have an object and a policy that smoothly wraps around a given handle or other small holes inside of the object. Regarding the actual collision avoidance, during the initial setup, there is very little that we try to do against it. So what we do is, if a collision happens and this doesn't result in a successful grasp, we define that this initial starting position is not valid, and so we discard it.
Okay, so you cannot grasp.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last word.
You cannot grasp in this case. You discard the policy and then you don't have an alternative.
Sorry, I'm not catching the last word.
You discard the policy and you don't have an alternative policy.
Exactly, we use only one policy.
Each time you are controlling the fingertips to grasp. You don't do palm grasps with this strategy. Is that correct?
Yes. So we have grasps that focus around the object, and the grasps itself, they will either go around the fingertips, or in some cases they will wrap around an object, and then you have a grasp that uses not just the tips, but also other portions of the finger. But the direct grasps with palms itself, that's only incidental.
Okay, and concerning the experimental aspects, I found the thesis a bit on the robotic part. So what's your insight about performing these works on real robots, and where do you think it's more feasible, and where would you place your contribution? Which part of the thesis could actually be the least complex and more useful for the roboticists, for doing it in the real world on a real robot?
Yes, so there are two aspects. First of all, the capacitive sensors themselves. Those we can already verify that they work in the real world themselves. Combined with that is actually that the vision aspect, so the ProcNet system that we developed, that is currently being designed by a couple of colleagues of ours to actually work in the real world. So as part of the HBP group, they had that set up, took our simulation, and used that in real world scenarios for object detection and then actual grasping afterwards. So the two things that can be used right now in the real world are the capacitive sensors as well as the ProcNet system.
Okay, concerning the simulator, I found this very interesting and promising, but so I wonder why you didn't push this forward. And in fact, do you have, are there other people using this simulator? Do you have a maintained GitHub repository or something that you think has some perspective of continuity, or?
Yes. So the source code itself, it's available on GitHub, and I can send you a link afterwards. Actually, the simulator itself, we used that within HBP for our demonstrator. So we used that within the demonstrator to look at how it, to test different grasps out. However, unfortunately, apart from that, I don't think that there is currently anyone else using it.
And why? What is the? Why do you think? Because when the chapter, it seems like a beautiful solution, but then what is the drawback? Why do you think it's not being adopted, or what is missing to make it more popular?
Yes. So one of the things that's difficult in this simulator is that we're using Lagrangian mechanics for the kinematics chains. And unfortunately, at the moment, these Lagrangian mechanics, we have to compute them by hand for different grippers. From what I've seen, there are certain methods of automating that, but I haven't looked into it too much. And because of that, it's very difficult for other people to use this approach for other grippers and things that we haven't manually set everything up ourselves.
Okay. If you had extra time on your thesis, then assume you had more years, on which of the topics would you focus?
So I would probably focus on the behavioral manifolds themselves at the end. Right now, what we have there is we have a setup and something that works, but it's very much a prototype. So many of the things, such as, for example, the capacitive sensors, they are in a prototype stage where we can show that they work, but we still need to do a lot of work to get them from something that's usable in the lab to something that's usable outside of it. And it's similar for our behavioral manifolds. Like discussed previously, we only have one grasp synthesis policy available. It might be interesting to see how it works out with different approaches to this.
Thank you. And concerning the occlusion, managing occlusions, so I see you opted for this deep neural network, probably because of the collaboration with EPFL that you mentioned also today. I was wondering, nevertheless, it's not very clear for me how you can estimate the 3D pose when the object is actually occluded. And this is my last question. So, yes, I think there are solutions. Somehow I don't understand how you can estimate the depth of an object if it's occluded, even with the magic of learning.
Yes. The idea behind this is that with the deep predictive coding network, we get a segmentation mask. And this segmentation mask, it gives us an idea of where the object is. And the interesting part is that it estimates where the object is behind the occluded parameters, behind the things that occlude the object as well. So that means we have a camera image and a mask at a certain position, and we can have the information in this mask without the thing that's occluding the object. Because of this, then we can try out, in a 3D renderer or whatever else, different poses of the object itself and see which pose most accurately maps towards this segmentation mask.
Okay, I see. Thank you again very much, and thank you again also for inviting me.
Thanks a lot, Professor Cherubini, also for these wonderful questions and your time in preparing. I would like to pass on the word now to Dr. Rico Möckel, expert in cognitive robotics at the Faculty of Science and Engineering, Maastricht University. Rico.
Dear Prorector, many thanks. Dear candidate, I would like to also use the opportunity to congratulate you on your thesis. I would fully confirm actually what Professor Cherubini said, like the most impressive part indeed is like the broadness of the thesis and the different topics that you nevertheless actually try to integrate in the end into like, one combined research. I would also use the opportunity actually to congratulate, of course, the supervision team for this very nice work. I fully agree with Professor Cherubini, like due to the broadness, of course, of the topics, there are like many details that would be still worth actually discussing. Mm-hmm. And I would love to use this opportunity to ask you a couple of questions in that direction. First of all, I would like to thank you actually for the contribution of a simulator, which of course is always a big challenge still in robotics when it comes to grasp generation. And then I found an interesting statement already in your introduction, which I would like to cite, which says like, we designed a physics simulation engine capable of accurately modeling the interactions between a robot arm and a grasp object. And I think many roboticists actually will agree that this is a fundamental, very strong challenge actually. And I would love to ask you to elaborate a bit more on this accuracy. So where do you see the strengths? I think you mentioned them strongly already during your presentation, but especially also where do you see limitations actually of your current simulator?
Yes, esteemed opponent, thank you for your question and for your comment. Regarding the limitation, one of the things that I already mentioned is that at the moment, because we're using Lagrangian mechanics for that, if you want to include a new gripper or a new robot arm, you need to manually compute these different equations and put them into the simulation itself. So I think that's currently one of the biggest challenges towards this. Next to this is because we're modeling the simulator with a penalty-based approach, the actual parameters themselves, they must be generated via experimentation. And there has been some work done on this for certain materials, looking at how these different materials can be modeled in our approach, but the research done is limited. So we were lucky enough that the materials that have already been investigated, they're similar to the ones that are available in a robot, but if we want to expand that to something more complicated, or something else, like say it's a styrofoam or anything else, then that would require additional experimentation. And I think that is one of the biggest limitations of our current simulator. That right now it's a lot of work to include additional materials and additional grippers or other hardware that we want to simulate.
Okay, many thanks. So I understand indeed, like this is always a challenge to find out the parameters for such a model. But in the modeling work itself, are there any limitations that you can think about?
Yes, one of the things is also something that Professor Ralf Peters mentioned, that if an object is very thin, then the simulation might fail. Because if it is too thin, then the simulation steps might not be accurate enough and the object would overlap too much, and that would cause something that's not really intended to be modeled in with our approach.
I see, many thanks. Then I would love to move on actually to chapter 2, but also like one of the following up chapters that actually starts using the capacitive sensors that you developed. Maybe as an introductory question, so how do you see at the moment the maturity of your sensors? So when we talk about, we typically talk about technology readiness levels, but in general actually, like, so how ready is the sensor actually to be used?
Yes, so the capacitive sensor itself, we have different things that we're using them. One of them is in the gripper. That is that still requires a lot of minimization and proper calibration to use it well. Simply put, because it's so small and because it's at the tips of grippers, it's difficult to integrate all of the hardware into these small aspects, to these small fingertips. So in this case, we still need to do a lot of work in minimizing the hardware itself. For the larger components that we would move along the hull of a robot, let's say, that's pretty far along. In that case, what we still need to do is we first of all need to make it look a little bit nicer, and we need to look at ways of managing many more sensors. Because right now we're looking at 5 sensors at most, and if we want to integrate that into the robot hull on multiple different places, we would need not just these 5 sensors that are available in one sensing pad, I would say it, but depending on how many you want to put on the robot, multiple different areas. And this requires additional processing capabilities, which I am not sure how well the current processing power of the small microcontrollers we're using would hold up to that.
Many thanks also for these clarifications. Then maybe a bit to move on. Actually, I was also very interested in seeing indeed that you also provide some description in terms of like electrical diagrams. I understood from your chapter 2 that you at the moment have 5 electrodes from which you're reading signals.
Yes.
One actually additional electrode actually to excite, of course, and generates the electromagnetic field. I was wondering then, when looking at your circuit diagrams, why is there only 4 amplifiers? Is there like some particular clever scheme actually that allows you to read 5 electrodes from 4 amplifiers? Or is something missing?
Yes, so we actually have a clever scheme that's a bit further, or yes, that allows us to switch one electrode out. So we're looking at 4 different amplifiers where we can read these 4 different values, but we switch one of them out.
Okay, and what is the impact then on the performance of your system due to the switching?
Yes, so impact from the actual measurements, we luckily haven't seen a lot of impact. The actual impact is in the microcontroller itself, because we needed a microcontroller with the capability of measuring these analog signals at a high enough frequency that we can actually get roughly 400 kilohertz out of each of the different electrodes. So because we're now looking at 5 electrodes instead of 4, we needed a higher powered microcontroller for that. And we had to limit the frequency of the various electrodes themselves. So the frequency generated by the LC tank.
Okay, thank you. Then, what I found very impressive, of course, is that you did not just like build a capacitive sensor, but that you also started to look directly into the applications. And I would love to refer now to your chapter 7, where you started using this actually as part of your human-robot collaboration scheme in terms of simulations. And what was not so really clear for me was like how the capacitive sensors actually have been simulated. And this is because from my understanding, of course, now the signal strength will depend on many factors. It will depend on the material, it will depend on the distance, of course, to the object, but it will most likely also depend on the orientation. And that means like when your robot arm is moving, while the human arm in simulation is stationary, the signals will vary actually drastically, probably. But I couldn't find like any detailed insight how this has been simulated.
Yes, so back when we were in Stockholm, we took a lot of experimental data to see how various different configurations of robot arm and human arm actually interact with each other. And from that, we then derived a simple model for each of these capacitive sensors. We compared this capacitive sensor model to our experimental data, and we could actually find that just keeping it relatively simple, so with simple 1 over r squared distance approximation, we got okay results, which were similar enough between experimental data and simulation that we said we could use this to test out our approach for the multimodal localization in simulation.
Okay, many thanks. And can you quantify a bit the error that actually has been introduced by this method, by the simplifications?
Apologies, not at the moment.
Okay, fair enough, yeah. Can I still ask one question?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I was also very curious actually about the neural networks actually that you have been exploring. And in chapter 6, I think where they were mostly described, your ProdNet architecture. And there's something very interesting when it comes to your section 6.3, where you also did some explanation or like some exploration actually of meta-parameters. So as we know, of course, these networks, they are highly dependent on these architectures and also the choice of parameters. Now, in your thesis, you could only quickly actually summarize, and I was wondering if you could provide me still with a few more insights. So you selected one particular architecture, and was wondering like why this actually is the best architecture that you found. If you did some analysis, and also if you have some insights actually into this methodology.
Yes. So regarding this approach of ours, this was the portion that was done in collaboration with Alban Borny. So I must apologize, but I'm not 100% familiar with it. What the idea behind it was that the sensor itself was already used for next frame prediction. And because this means that there is information about the system inside of the neural network, we can extract that in a different manner. However, we didn't perform a lot of experimentation to see which architectures would work better or which would not work out that well. So this approach of ours, was one that worked well for our purposes, but we didn't compare it to other approaches.
Yeah. Many things. Yeah, you see, like you have a very rich thesis, so I could keep asking, but I would love to give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. Also beautiful questions. I pass on the word now to, last but not least, Dr. Mario Senden, expert in cognitive computational neuroscience, Maastricht University, Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience. Mario.
Thank you very much, dear prorector. Dear candidate, I also would like to extend my congratulations to you and to your supervisory team on this very, very nice thesis. I enjoyed the presentation today. It was very clear, which is challenging, right, to make it clear for also people from very different backgrounds, and I think you managed to do that. That was very impressive. And of course, I also very much enjoyed reading your thesis. I think I will continue with the questions that Dr. Möckel has just basically started. So I was also very interested, of course, in chapter 6 and the neural network architecture you have there. Very nice that it's inspired by the brain and the spirit of the whole human brain project. But actually, I was thinking, since you are a roboticist or electrical engineer and you have, in this case, an application where you don't need to be inspired by the brain, I was wondering in which direction you would take it if you abstract a bit away from how the human would do it. So you have, in this case, if I saw it correct, you had a single static camera that would take the images and would look at the scene in order to estimate poses. And I was actually wondering, what if you had the opportunity to place several cameras in a setup like this? And my first question there would be, if you had several cameras, how would you actually change the architecture of the neural network, and how exactly would you train it in order to deal with several perspectives coming in at once?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your comment and for your questions. The way that I would approach this is, from an engineering perspective, it's that you always change one thing at a time. And right now, if I had the opportunity to implement multiple different cameras at one point, what I would do is I would keep this ProgNet-based approach for each camera individually, which would give me multiple different segmentation masks. And then I would use this idea that we had with the localization via 3D renderer, that we would perform this localization on each of these segmentation masks individually, and then look at the different errors and see which pose gives us the minimum error in total across all of these different options.
Okay, yeah, very interesting, very straightforward, using essentially the same setup several times and looking at the best solution. So, yeah, I was wondering if you could also envision an architecture that maybe then further down the line would integrate the three perspectives. So would your perspective is end stage integration, but you could think of where along this line another form of integration could be interesting. Could you just speculate a bit?
Yes, actually I can. Let me just find the correct slide. Yes. So the idea here behind the predictive coding network is that we take an image and then we further abstract upon it. So the higher we go up in these different levels, the less of the actual image is available, and the more this data is converted to abstract information. The idea that I would have is that instead of stopping at the end, which we do here, we could add an additional layer behind it. And so we would have this architecture for one camera, or for multiple different cameras, and then at the end we would add an additional layer where we would combine each of these together and see how these different aspects combine into one image itself.
Thank you very much. And to just follow up on that, from the other side of this setup, so not the network, but the camera. Where would you place the cameras? How many cameras would you ideally want?
Oh, ideally I'd want as many as possible.
100 cameras.
But, yes,
yeah.
exactly. But realistically, I would say around 4, maybe 6 cameras. So having 4 of them along the top of the work cell, looking at it from different angles, and then 2 more, maybe directly on top of the robot, and 1 from the side.
And one more question in that direction is, right now the cameras that you have was static. This setup again sounds like a static cameras. So I was also wondering, you were inspired by predictive coding here. An extension of the theory is also active inference. So what if the cameras were movable?
Yes. When I think about that, I personally think that it would be a lot more difficult to train the predictive coding architecture to deal with the cameras being moved around the scene itself. If we take that out of the equation, it might be interesting to have a system which moves the camera and aligns it in such a way that you minimize occlusion. But this is all very speculative, and I don't really know how I would implement that itself.
I understand. I hope you would use Angora Pi training a policy, because I was also quite excited to see that that was in the thesis. And seeing that it was in the thesis, I assume you have some idea of also the things that we have also been working on in Maastricht, in particular on dexterity. And there I would like to then transition to your chapter 3, and I was very interested in your grasp quality metric, and was actually wondering, what if we were to integrate this as an auxiliary reward when we train our in-hand object manipulation? Do you think this is a meaningful idea, and how do you think this might affect the policy that is being learned?
Yes. Actually, I was thinking about that while I was working in Maastricht as well. Unfortunately, what I see is that our grasp quality metric, it tries to take one grasp and keep it fixed. And it tries to, it assigns a better value the better it can keep something fixed. And what's happening with your dexterity is you want to actually be able to move the object and manipulate it in such a way, for a given task. I think that is not where, this is unfortunately something where my metric is not well suited to this task.
Do you see how it could be extended or adjusted?
It might be adjustable. So some of the ideas behind it, like the local sensitivity analysis, could be adjusted towards this specific task that you mentioned. You would need, to optimize different parameters than, robustness to external perturbation.
Okay, thank you very much. My last question is also on this grasp quality metric, but moving a little bit outside of robotics, more into behavioral neuroscience, and maybe the most speculative question here. But I was wondering, could this metric also be used to evaluate human grasps? And I understand this is difficult because you need a lot of information on forces and masses and so on. But do you think this is in principle possible? And what would you need to make it happen in terms of maybe hardware to measure things on the human?
Yes. I'm aware of a certain hardware project called the Shadow Hand, which is trying to model a human hand as a robotic hand. That might be a good idea to use. But when talking about simulation itself, we would need to...
We have a couple of seconds left, so you can answer the question, please.
Okay. So we would need a method of... sorry, I lost my track of thought there.
It's okay. You would need a method with regard to the simulation itself when we have the shadow robotic hand, I think.
Yes, exactly. So we would need to integrate the Lagrangian mechanics into our simulation, because that's what we're using as the basis of our grasp metric. But apart from that, there wouldn't be a large issue with trying to test out this grasp metric on a human hand itself instead of just a robot hand.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Senden. Michael Zechmair, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. And I kindly ask you and your colleagues and friends to await our return in this room. Thanks a lot. All right, please.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Get the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Michael Zechmair, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Goebel is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with the Dutch university custom, and I invite you, Rainer, now to take the floor.
All right, please.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Michael Byron Zechmair, the degree of doctor, and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Here we go, Doctor.
Soll ich dann weitergehen? Soll ich jetzt weitergehen?
Gib's einen der Paralymphen. Gut. Ja. Also, ich setze uns runter hier.
Ja, gut.
Ich gebe es ihm.
Ja, gib's ihm, ja.
Danke. Congratulations, Dr. Zechmair. I'm happy to be the first who is allowed to call you like this. And yeah, what a great defense. You answered very, very clearly, honestly, as one can expect from you if one knows you a bit. And so I'm really glad about that. And I want also extend this to your family. Your brother is here, right? And other members of the yes. Sie können sehr stolz sein auf den Michael. Ja? Ja. Good, good. I also want to thank your daily supervisor, Yannick Morel. He is not here, unfortunately, today. But of course, I was a very remote helicopter supervisor, so I'm not even knowing all the details of your fantastic work. But I'm really proud myself that you are also a doctoral student of us.
Thank you.
And I want to also extend my thanks to all the Corona members. Thank you very much for your exciting questions. Also, especially Andrea Cherubini from Nantes now. Thank you very much. Yeah, and as someone like me who always supports interdisciplinary work, like the Human Brain Project is a prime example, I'm really happy that we have now a real engineer here, right? So you really have got your degree in Munich, Technical University of Munich, as electrical and computer engineering, is that right?
Yes, electrical and computer science.
Computer science, wonderful. Yes, really great. And when I heard you today, how wonderfully clear you answered your questions and said, yes, I can solve this if I do this and this and that. There runs through my mind a German saying, dem Ingenieur ist nichts zu schwer. That means in English, there's nothing too difficult for an engineer, right? So this was what runs through my mind, and I think it's pretty clear that this is a good example of an engineer today, but an engineer who learned a lot. You learned a lot about predictive coding, about a bit of the brain, lots of things like sensor technology and so on. It's really impressive how many different things you combined. And of course, this was also due to some extent of the environment you were put in. Mm-hmm. You know, I remember very well when I met you the first time. It was actually when Yannick moved from Munich to Maastricht and invited you to give a talk for an open PhD position. Mm-hmm. And he asked me to have a look who you are and whether you would be the right person. And then I remember you already talked at that day your kind of application talk day or so, you talked already about the differences between physics, real physics, and simulated physics, and how challenging it is to match these two. I remember that was part of your talk that very day. And I thought, wow, this guy is really smart. So many equations, wow. And then, so nice. You know, I thought he fits to Maastricht. So I said immediately to Yannick, get this guy. But honestly, he had you already because you worked for him already, or with him in Munich. And and of course, the credit to put you on these difficult, challenging problems and guide you through is completely Yannick's, not mine. And of course, the collaborations within the Showcase 6, which you were one of the most prominent people, the Cobotics project, which was part of our work package. And you were really one of the prominent people pushing that through the Human Brain Project. And I remember very well when I was kind of stressed with having to present like what, I don't know how many, 30 labs have done in the HPP for my work package. You were invited to come to Brussels, right? And you were there then in a room with your showcase and you showed your work. And I was looking in the faces of the people visiting you and hoped they like it. And I saw they were really impressed. And some told me afterwards that this is a impressive work what you have done. Of course, it was a teamwork, like in the spirit of the Human Brain Project, but your contribution was well visible and appreciated by not only me, but really by many people. So I heard that you, and we know it, are always hardworking, even sometimes in the nights. And I heard once there was the fire alarm, because I think you got your microwave food or something, and then. But yes. I think it was just stopped in time, right? The fire.
Yeah, the fire department was aborted, so they didn't come.
Wonderful.
It was
really,
they were nearly called.
Yeah, wonderful. And then there's a thing. If you you must really like the Stanford bunny. I saw it in 3 slides of your presentation today, and I counted at least 7 figures have your bunny. So you must really like this bunny. Is there a story behind?
It was heavily influenced by Yannick.
Ah, okay.
But it's also but it's also a very good model that we used throughout most of the PhD. Actually, we used it for the grasp metric, and even before that, we had already tested it out for the physics simulation, and so it was just something that accompanied us throughout the entire PhD. Then.
I like it too. So keep using it. I also heard you in your free time. Of course, you work hard, but there's a little bit of free time, fortunately. And I heard that you tinker with electrical engineering stuff, and also sometimes play, I think, with your brother, computer games or with friends.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. It's good to hear that you play Dungeons and Dragons and things like that.
Yes, that as well.
Yeah. And then I was really surprised. I learned, I didn't know, but prepared for this laudatio, that you are a very sportive person. I did not notice. You are windsurfing. Is that right?
Well, I try to, yes. I was a bit more into windsurfing. To be honest, it's my dad who loves to go windsurfing.
Oh.
And so he persuades me that it might be a good idea for me to join him sometimes.
It's good. It's a fantastic sport and very impressive. And another thing I found very particular, you love Spezi. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
And I heard that your Paranymph sitting over there, with whom I have to talk about bringing the book with the pages to the candidate, but we talk later about that. But I heard that he brought Spezi from Germany to Maastricht for you.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Right?
Often. Multiple times, actually. Yes, even an entire crate of Spezi.
So you are a special Spezi for me now also. So it's
yes.
Yeah, and what, of course, I knew, but I got confirmed when I digged a bit about you. You are a really kind person, very nice person, very helpful. You try always to help. And I know you had it not always an easy time, because you and Raphael are, of course, a small group of expertise within a group in our department which does mainly other things, right? There's some overlap, of course, with our computational modelers, like with Mario and others. But nonetheless, it was a very special subgroup, right? But you managed well, and I'm really proud what you have achieved. and I wish you all the best for the future. One thing, there must be an affinity to Canada, right? You were in January there. You want to work there, you told me?
Yes. Yeah.
And also this Byron in your name, has this some roots in Canada? Is that?
A little bit, yes. My dad was born in Canada, and it just so happens that my dad wanted to name me Byron, I believe, but my mom said that's a bit too much of a strange name for Germany, so there was a compromise that my middle name would be Byron and my first name is Michael.
Wonderful, wonderful to learn that. And I wish you then all the best for your future career, and congratulate you again and the family for this wonderful performance today, Dr. Michael Byron Zechmair.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Zechmair, also on behalf of the university, our rector, but also our dean of the Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience, congratulations. Be proud of what you have achieved, and congratulations goes also to the family and friends and colleagues, of course, because everything we do is teamwork, and I think you are a role model in being nice and teaming up. So congratulations, we are very proud of you. We will have, so by formally hereby finish this academic session and some formalities. You could already, if you like, leave the aula and go towards the reception. You also don't need to wait for the candidate. Just already take your drinks and whatever you have ordered on a dish. We will have a short photo moment here, and then we will also shortly move to the staircase in the mid hall for a photo to remember forever.
Thank you.
Thanks.